Hello everyone, welcome to another video about grammar. In this video, I'm going to talk about reduced adverbial clauses. I have another video about adverbial clauses, and if you think that you need to review this topic before watching this video, please go ahead and do so. Otherwise, let's go ahead and talk about this topic. So what are reduced adverbial clauses? Basically, these are reduced clauses that are made using a present participle and sometimes past participle. And they must have the same subject as the main clause. And this last condition is very, very important. And if you do not follow this last rule, you can make a very common mistake called dangling modifier. And I'm going to talk about it in the last slide. Here is one example of a reduced adverbial clause. While watching TV, I knocked a glass of water off the coffee table. Now, the first thing that you notice is that in the first clause, or the dependent or adverbial clause, we do not have a subject and we do not have a finite verb. And that is how reduced clauses are made. So the goal is to use either a present participle and a past participle without the subject or without the modal auxiliaries, just to avoid repetition, because we already have the subject in the main clause and we don't want to repeat it. And also, we already have a context in the main clause, and it just kind of tells us what the time or the tense of the verb is in the adverbial clause. So if it can be easily guessed from the main clause what the subject is and what the tense of the main verb in the adverbial clause is, you should really go ahead and reduce it to avoid repetition. Here is another example. Walking home from school, Danny was bitten by a dog. This example is a little bit different because it doesn't even have a subordinate conjunction like while, when, as, because, or anything similar to that. So depending on what subordinate conjunction you're going to use, you can drop some of them and you have to keep some others in the reduced form. And I'm going to talk about each and every one of these. So let's take a look at what a present participle is. Now, it is simply the ing form of a verb, and I've talked about this in my other videos. But basically, it is the ing form, and you can just turn a verb into ing form by adding ing and making some changes to its spelling sometimes. Can it have the perfect form or the perfect aspect? Of course, you can use having plus the past participle form to create this perfect aspect of a present participle. I understand this can be a little bit confusing because the main verb is in the past participle form, but remember, past participle form alone does not indicate any time. It is simply a form of verb that is used in certain structures. And in this case, we are using it in perfect form, like right after have. And because we are free to use have in any form, like ing or simple past, we can play with it and use it in the form that we want. Here, in this case, we want the ing form. So this modal auxiliary, have, takes the role of the verb that plays the function or does the function of showing the aspect or the tense of the verb. Here, we don't have a tense, we just have an aspect because it is not a finite verb. Here is one example using this perfect present participle, having written. So you can say, having written the essay, Julia decided not to submit it. Why do we use this? Can we just say, writing the essay, Julia decided not to submit it? The answer is simply yes, you can do that, but the meaning would be different. And I'm going to talk about this later on in the video. But basically, when you say writing the essay, Julia decided not to submit it, we mean that Julia did not actually finish the essay, and Julia made this decision in the process of writing the essay. But when you add this having or the perfect aspect, you're kind of saying that first she wrote the essay and she completed the task, and then she moved on to the next step, which was deciding not to submit it. Can it have the passive form? Of Of course, you can use present participles in passive forms like being written. And again, here be is the modal auxiliary that we use to create passives. And it is the verb be that functions as the entity or as the part of the verb that shows the tense and an aspect. Here, as I said, we don't have a tense. This is just a participle. We have an aspect, and that is the continuous aspect. So being written in a different language, the novel needed an editor is an example of this continuous participle. Does it have a simple form? Yep, that is the most common participle that we use. That is just the ing form of the verb. So we use this more commonly, and it can be used both for simple forms or continuous forms. And I'm going to talk about this in more details through examples. Now, the first group of subordinate conjunctions that I want to talk about is when, while, and as. Now, when and as are very similar to each other in terms of structure. So this is one example. When or as they were discussing the sales, they noticed some issues in the records. The adverbial clause has the active form of the verb. It is not passive, it is active. As you can see, it's obvious the verb is not in past participle form, and that indicates that this is an active form. So when you have an active verb in the adverbial clause, and when you have when and as, all you need to do is just get rid of when and as, and also the subject and modal auxiliaries, and just keep the main verb in the ing form. And this will give you the reduced adverbial clause for these. So discussing the sales, they noticed some issues in the records. I included this example because I wanted to point out two important things. First, the main verb here is simple past, but that doesn't change the rules. Even though this is a simple past verb, when we are going to reduce this, we're going to use the present participle. Doesn't really matter because present participle doesn't have the time. It doesn't have a time. It doesn't indicate any time or a tense. And it just shows some kind of an action or a state. And it is the main clause that kind of helps us realize when the action happened and under what conditions the action happened. The second point is that the main reference, the subject Judy, is in the adverbial clause, but we are going to remove it in the reduced form. And if you do it, then you have to move it to the main clause so that we still have the main reference. Otherwise, we wouldn't know who you're talking about. So, seeing her neighbor, Judy waved a friendly hi, and that is the reduced form of this clause. While is different. All the rules are the same in terms of the verb and how to change it to the participle form, and how to even move the main reference to actually the main clause. All of these are the same. The only difference is that we cannot remove while, and that is just a rule. If you remove it, well, it's not going to just be easy for the listener to guess what the word was. So while writing his resume, Jack noticed that he had little to offer. Here, while emphasizes that the action of the main verb happened during a process, and that's why we keep while, and we want to emphasize that point. The second group of subordinate conjunctions also refer to time, but these are a little bit different because they do not refer to a process necessarily. They just refer to a point of time. I'm going to start with after. After I wash the dishes, I will do the laundry. Here, the verb is in active form, so we're going to use present participle again, and we're going to get rid of the subject as well. And we can keep after in the sentence. After washing the dishes, I will do the laundry. So this is very similar to while. We have to keep after here just to show that one action happened after the other one. If we do not do this, if I say washing the dishes, I will do the laundry, it's just going to mean that I did these two at the same time. So can you get rid of after? Of course, but you have to make a little bit of extra change to the main verb. And you have to turn it to a perfect aspect. So you have to say, having washed the dishes, I will do the laundry. The other example is about before. Before is like while. You have to keep it in the sentence and it follows the same rules. You can use present participle for active verbs, not passive ones, of course. So the teacher reviewed the lesson from last session before he started the new lesson, and you can just reduce it by removing the subject and turning the verb into the ing form. And there you go. You have the reduced form of this adverbial clause. Now, we normally do not use until and since in reduced form. You might see them, but this is very uncommon, so I decided not to talk about these, and I just want to focus on the forms that are more common. We can use once in reduced forms when used with passive. So far we've been looking at examples that are all in active form. I mean, the verb in the adverbial clause was in the active form, not passive. But if it is in the passive form and if it is used with once, you can reduce it. And reducing it is going to be a little bit different. Now, notice the verb that is used in the passive form. The watch is dunked, means submerged or put into the water. It will stop working. Now, because we have the main reference in the adverbial clause, we move it to the main clause. And all we have to do is just get rid of the subject and any modal auxiliaries. And then we will have the reduced form. Once dunked in the water, the watch will stop working. Now, you can also reduce clauses that have words like as if or as though. Here, as is different from the one that I showed you before. It does not refer to time. It refers to similarity between two actions. And normally, we use these when we want to talk about the similarity between the actions or the states of the main clause verb and the adverbial clause verb. So we do not normally use as and like in reduced form when talking about similarity. So that's off the list. But we can use as if and as though in reduced forms. And here is one example. Linda stared at the empty room as if or as though she remembered something. Notice again that the verb remembered is an active form. So all we have to do is just get rid of the subject, turn the verb into the ing form, and we will have the reduced form. So Linda stared at the empty room as if or as though remembering something. You can also reduce clauses that have because, as, or since for reason. So as and since can be used for time reference, but here we are using them for reason. And when you use them for reason, you can reduce them. You can even get rid of them in the reduced clause. Here is an example. Because, as, or since he came from a traditional background, he could not adapt to cultural changes easily. You can easily reduce this by getting rid of the subject and changing the verb to the present participle, and then remove any subordinate conjunctions. And here is the result. Coming from a traditional background, he could not adapt to cultural changes easily. In cases when the subordinate conjunction is removed, you have to make an extra guess. That is what the subordinate conjunction actually was, the one that was removed. And it is easy to guess based on the context or the relationship between the two sentences or the clauses. So coming from a traditional background cannot refer to time. Remember, the only ones that we can remove, the only subordinate conjunctions that we can remove in the reduced clauses are when and as that refer to time, and because and as and since that refer to reason. So it's not very difficult to distinguish between a time reference and a reason reference. And sometimes even both of these happen at the same time. Sometimes you give a reason and it at the same time refers to time, like while we are here, we should do some shopping. While we are here refers to both the time of the main clause, we should do some shopping here, and also reason. So it's kind of saying that, okay, because we are here and at the same time as we are here. So because these are very close sometimes, they can mean both at the same time, like an adverbial clause used with while, for example, or as, can refer to both time and reason. And I've talked about this more in my video about adverbial clauses. But the point is that not all of the subordinate conjunctions get removed in the reduced form, and only the ones about the reason and the time reference do so, and it's not difficult to guess what they were. You can reduce adverbial clauses that have although and though in them. And we can do this under certain conditions. We can use these in reduced form only if there is a form of verb be, like is, am, are, been, was, were, in the sentence, followed by one of the following three. So what are these three things? The first one is a past participle, or the passive form. So in this example, we have a passive verb, because we have a form of verb be and a past participle right after that. So we clearly have the passive form here. And because all the rules apply here, we can turn it into a reduced clause. Although hired recently, he received a promotion last week. Just please note that we do not change the verb into present participle, because this is in the passive form. And in the past, if the main verb is in the passive form, when we reduce them, we use the past participle form, not the present participle. Now, the second thing coming after a form of verb be that can qualify an adverbial clause for reduction is adjective. Here's an example. Though she was disappointed, and here we have an adjective, disappointed, right after the verb be. And it means that we can get rid of the subject and the verb be and keep the adjective in the reduced form. So though disappointed, Zoe decided to forgive her friend. Finally, if you see a prepositional phrase after a form of verb be, you can reduce the adverbial clause that has although or though in it. Like this example, though he was under pressure, he completed the task well. So under pressure is a prepositional phrase. It has a preposition under, and it is followed by a noun or a noun phrase. And so this is a prepositional phrase, and it comes after a form of verb be, and it has although or though in the adverbial clause. So all the conditions are there. So all we have to do is just remove the subject and the verb be and keep the rest, and then we will have the reduced form of this adverbial clause. So although or though under pressure, he completed the task well. Now, finally, as I promised, I'm going to talk about the dangling modifier and what it is and how to avoid it. So this is a common mistake, and this happens when the subjects of the reduced adverbial clause and the main clause are not the same. Take a look at this example. When he was fixing his car, a crow stole his shiny screwdriver. Now, you might think that you can reduce this because we have when, and we have seen examples that have the adverbial clause with when, and we reduced them actually and nothing happened. But because the sentence is missing one important condition, we cannot do it, and that is the subjects of the main clause and the adverbial clause are not the same. So if you reduce this, you're going to end up with this sentence. Fixing his car, a crow stole his shiny screwdriver. And this is not going to make sense. Because basically what you're saying here is that a crow was fixing his car, and the crow himself, stole his shiny screwdriver. And it doesn't make sense. Well, maybe in some context, in some stories, but not in reality. So unless you really want to mean that a crow was fixing a car and then that crow stole his shiny screwdriver, then go ahead and use that. But this is not the same as the sentence above, like when he was fixing his car. These do not have the same meaning. And this is called the dangling modifier. And if you wonder about the reason why we call this a dangling modifier, that is because the adverbial clause is considered a modifier. It modifies the meaning of the main clause. It just adds information to it. But it is dangling. It means that it's not attached to anything. It doesn't have any attachment point. And what is that attachment point? Well, that is the subject. If the subject is missing, and if the subject is not there, and if it is not there, the link is missing, and there's no actual connection between these two, and that's why they call it a dangling modifier. I hope this video was helpful, and please consider hitting the like button so that people like you can use this video. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm going to make more videos about grammar, and let me know in the comments what kind of topics you want me to talk about, and I'll prepare videos for those topics as well. Thank you.